All right, class. We're going to look at exercises 5.4 through 5.8. They're all based off of the question stem you see here for Mavericks Inc. Remember, with activity-based costing, the whole idea here is that we are breaking down the production process into its major components, its major activities in this case, and then allocating the overhead from those activities to the different products. Hopefully, if we've done the activity-based study properly and we've picked the right drivers, it should lead to a more accurate allocation of overhead as opposed to using a single predetermined overhead rate, which allocates all overhead using just a singular rate, which might muddy the waters a bit, might confuse and lead to inaccurate allocation of overhead. So let's take a look at how we actually apply this and quantitatively. So Mavericks Inc. is a manufacturing company. They have traditionally used a single predetermined overhead rate to allocate overhead to their products. However, they are in the process of implementing an activity-based costing system to help them more accurately allocate overhead. Below are the identified activities and driver information. So we see there's three different activities. There's setups, there's machining, and there's inspections. We see for setups, they've allocated 315,000 of overhead to it, with the estimate of 30,000 setups being the driver. Machining, they've allocated 680,000 of overhead to that activity, with the estimation of 175,000 machine hours utilized. And then inspections, 75,000 of overhead has been allocated, with 14,000 inspections expected to be used. Based off of all of this, throughout questions 5.4 through 5.8, we're going to determine the activity-based rates for each of the major activities. And then in 5.7 and 5.8, we're going to apply overhead to the different products that Mavericks Inc. produces, shooting sleeves and basketballs. So there's a lot of information here. The first step, though, when you're doing an activity-based costing problem, assuming they've given you the activities and the drivers, you have to calculate the activity-based rates. And simply how we do that, we take the allocated overhead. So let's look at setups, for example. It was allocated $315,000 in overhead, with the assumption that the driver is the number of setups, and they're estimating they're going to utilize 30,000 setups. Because of that, we're going to get an activity-based rate of $10.50 per setup. So what does that number actually mean? Well, if I'm producing a product and the assumption is every time I have to do a manufacturing setup for the production run, I'm incurring $10.50 in setups overhead. So therefore, I'm going to allocate $10.50 in overhead to that product line. And you'll see how we apply these here in exercises 5.7 and 5.8. Machining, we're going to allocate for exercise 5.5 in the same manner. It was allocated 680,000 in overhead. The driver was machine hours, and the estimate was 175,000 machine hours. That means we're going to get an activity-based rate by dividing the two. We're going to get an activity-based rate of $3.89 per machine hour. And similar logic to our setups activity-based rate. For every machine hour incurred in the production of any product, we will allocate to it $3.89 in machining overhead. Inspections is the same thing. We allocated 75,000 of overhead to inspections, with the assumption that we would incur 14,000 inspections during the year. So that's the cost driver. We divide the two to get our activity-based rate of $5.36. So we've calculated our activity-based rate. And one thing I want to point out here, because I've taught this for a long time, and I've seen students kind of where they mess up, they calculate the rates fine. Where they mess up is the actual application of the rates. One mistake I see common is they change the rate or they recalculate the rate for each product line. Do not do that. Use these rates. These rates that you calculate, you're going to use them for both product lines. When you're applying overhead to the shooting sleeve, when you're applying overhead to the basketball, you are going to use the same rate. These three rates, you're going to use for both product lines. So let's look at exercises 5.7 and 5.8 and actually apply overhead to the shooting sleeve and to the basketball product line. This is the activity information, and this is in the question stem in 5.7 and 5.8 as well. But this is the information you need to apply overhead to each product line. So the shooting sleeve, so to produce all the units of the shooting sleeve, they incurred 10,000 setups, they used 60,000 machining hours, and they incurred 7,000 inspections. For the basketball, they utilized 19,000 setups, they incurred 110,000 machine hours, and they used 7,000 inspections. So to allocate overhead to each product, we're going to calculate. So we're going to start with the shooting sleeve. This is exercise 5.7. We're going to allocate to the shooting sleeve using the activity-based rate. So we carry those over from exercises 5.4 through 5.6. Notice they're the same as what we calculated up here. We don't recalculate them for the product or anything like that. We use those rates. And what we do to figure out how much overhead we're going to allocate from each activity to the shooting sleeve, we take the activity-based rate and we multiply by the volume of the activity that product incurs. So for setups, we calculated a rate of $10.50 per setup. Now we need to multiply by the number of setups the shooting sleeve utilized, which was 10,000. We multiply the two, we get an overhead allocation from setups of 105,000 to the shooting sleeve. Same process with machining. We had an activity-based rate for machining of $3.89 per machine hour, which again, we calculated up here. We multiply that by the number of machine hours that the shooting sleeve uses, which we get from this table up here. They use 60,000 machine hours. 60,000 times $3.89 per machine hour. We are going to allocate to it another $233,400 of overhead from the machining activity. Again, notice we're allocating overhead from each activity to the shooting sleeve. 3 activities, we're going to allocate 3 different overhead amounts, and then we'll ultimately add them up. Inspections, we calculated the inspections activity-based rate by taking the number, this $5.36 per inspection. We take the $5.36, we multiply it by the number of inspections the shooting sleeve incurred, which was 7,000. We get overhead allocated from the inspection activity of $37,520. So to figure out the total overhead allocated to the shooting sleeve, all we do is we add up all the overhead that was allocated from the 3 different activities. So setups, machining, and inspection. We add that all up. We are going to allocate to the shooting sleeve $375,920 in manufacturing overhead. For the basketball, same exact process. Notice between the shooting sleeve, I use the activity-based rates that we calculated at the top. For the basketball, I use the same rates to allocate overhead from each activity now to the basketball. The difference between the two is the volume of the activity. Remember with the basketball, they utilize 19,000 setups. So I take the 19,000 setups, multiply by the $10.50 per setup to get an overhead allocation of $199,500 from setups to the basketball product line. For machining, we use the $3.89 per machine hour activity-based rate. Again, we calculated up here. I'm going to multiply that by the volume, the number of machine hours the basketball product line used, which was 110,000. So if I multiply the two, I'm going to allocate to it $427,900 in overhead. For inspections, I take the $5.36 per inspection that we calculated up here, that activity-based rate, and I'm going to multiply by the number of inspections that were incurred to produce all of the basketball line, which was 7,000. I multiply the two. I'm going to allocate from inspections overhead in the amount of $37,520 to the basketball product line. So now I've allocated overhead from each activity to the basketball product line. To figure out the total amount of overhead I've allocated, I simply add up the three, the amount from setups, which is 199,500, the amount of overhead from machining, which was 427,900, and the amount from inspections, which was 37,520. So in total, I'm going to allocate to the basketball product line overhead in the amount of $664,920 utilizing an activity-based rate method.